My name is Eliana and I'm 32 years old. That day was supposed to be the happiest of my life. The day I'd walk down the aisle in a white dress, surrounded by love and well wishes. But that morning, while I was still sitting in front of the mirror waiting for my makeup, my phone buzzed with a single message from my father. Can't walk you down the aisle. Ava needs me for her big event. I went numb. Ava, my older sister, who had spent years resenting me and sabotaging everything I cared about, had once again succeeded in taking something precious away. In front of hundreds of guests, my father chose her over his own daughter on her wedding day. My chest tightened at the thought of walking alone under the gaze of everyone. But then, at what felt like the most hopeless moment, someone no one expected stepped forward, extended their arm, and offered to walk me down the aisle. The look on my father's face when he saw that person still sends chills through me. Have you ever been turned away by your own family on one of the most important days of your life? If it were you, would you walk alone to prove your strength? Or take someone else's hand to show you deserve joy too? Leave a comment and tell me how you'd feel. Hit like to give me the strength to finish telling this story. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because even I couldn't believe what came after. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio. Our house stood on a tree-lined street with a creaky old porch and the swing my mom used to sit on during warm summer afternoons. To me, childhood once meant carefree days running through the yard, my mother's laughter echoing through the house, and my father standing tall and steady like a fortress. I still remember my mother, Julia, her soft blue eyes and that smile that could melt away all weariness. My father, Mark, was a strong man who worked long hours at a construction company. He often came home and lifted me high into the air, making me laugh. Ava, my sister, was 4 years older than me, always quick, confident, and eager to act like she had everything figured out. That peaceful life changed forever one winter evening when I was 12. A car accident took my mother away without warning. The news hit like a brutal storm. I still remember sitting in the living room, the warm yellow light dimming across the wooden floor, the knock on the door, and the officer's heavy voice. Everything after that felt like a blur, except for my father's anguished cries in the night, and Ava holding me tightly with hollow eyes. My father crumbled. He became withdrawn, always staring into the distance, sometimes sitting silently on the couch for hours. Dinner became unbearably quiet, the house heavy with silence. I longed for a hug from him, a simple reassurance that he was still there for me, but he rarely spoke. Ava, at 16, used the silence to step into the role our mother left behind. She started whispering things to my father, things too calculated for me to fully understand at the time. I remember hearing her once say, "Eliana's selfish. She only ever thinks about herself." At first, my father dismissed her. But over time, I noticed him looking at me less kindly than before. Ava would often tell him I never helped with chores, that I wasted time reading books or drawing nonsense. In reality, I spent hours doing homework, trying hard to make him proud. One autumn evening, I brought home a certificate for academic excellence, my heart pounding with excitement. I held it out to him, hoping for a smile, a hug. But before he could react, Ava cut in, "It's just a piece of paper. She acts like she's some genius." My father glanced at me, hesitated, then placed the certificate on the table and simply said, "All right then." I swallowed my tears and forced a smile. Through small things like that, Ava planted an image of me in his mind, an ungrateful child craving attention. But all I ever wanted was his care, his words telling me I mattered. Instead, he drifted further away, as if an invisible wall had risen between us. I still remember my 13th birthday. I bought a cake with money I earned sweeping leaves for a neighbor. I lit the candles, waiting for my father to come home. When he walked through the door, Ava quickly said, "Eliana said you didn't need to come home early. You should go out with your friends." He sighed, "All right, I'll go for a bit," and left again, leaving me alone with flickering candles. Ava stood nearby, her eyes cold and triumphant. Moments like those repeated until my young heart grew numb. I buried myself in schoolwork, books, drawing, anything to escape the feeling of being forgotten. I tried to stay busy so I wouldn't have time to feel the growing distance. But the pain returned every time I heard him laugh with Ava, every time he praised her for being mature and responsible. One night I overheard them talking. Ava said, "Don't expect much from Eliana. She'll never understand what you've gone through." I stood quietly in the hallway, tears streaming down my face. I wanted to shout that I was trying my best too, that I was grieving Mom too, but I couldn't move. I knew that even if I spoke, he'd only look at me with doubt. After losing my mom, I didn't just lose the one who loved me most. I lost my connection to my father. Ava had claimed all his affection and trust. I became a shadow in my own home. My paintings hung unnoticed on my bedroom walls. My journals filled with feelings no one would ever read. I grew up in silence, constantly guarding my heart against new wounds. My father never noticed, or maybe he chose not to notice, that I still waited at the dinner table for him each night, still hoped he'd show up at my school recital. But Ava always knew how to interrupt, always had a story, always pulled him away. And he believed her again and again. Looking back, I realized that's when the cracks in our family became permanent. I tried to be a good student, a good daughter, but all it did was deepen Ava's resentment. And my father, the one who should have known better, chose to trust the louder voice. My childhood stopped being about summer swings and laughter in the kitchen. It became a long stretch of waiting, of hiding tears under pillows and whispering to myself that maybe I just wasn't enough to be loved. And from those fractures, my life took a turn into uncertainty, where I had to prove my worth not just to the world, but to the very people who had turned their backs on me. I never understood why Ava did it. Maybe to her, love was something you had to hoard, something that lost value the more people shared it. And the one she fought to possess wasn't just anyone, it was my father. Maybe it was because I resembled Mom, the way I read quietly in my room, the shape of my eyes. Ava was more like Dad, bold, blunt, quick to act. Maybe that's why I became the thorn in her side, especially after Mom passed. I began to notice strange things when I was 14. That was the year I competed in the county piano competition, one of the few times I truly felt proud of myself. I practiced endlessly, pushing through exhaustion, just hoping my dad would be there. I reminded him all week. He nodded, said, "I'll make it." On the day of the performance, I wore a black dress Mom had sewn, waiting backstage, heart pounding. I scanned the audience. His seat remained empty as the first notes played. After the performance, I came home quietly. Ava was on the couch, her red nails tapping away at her phone. She looked up and asked, "Back so soon?" I didn't answer. Later, Dad came home acting like nothing had happened. I asked carefully, "Did you forget my performance today?" He looked confused, then turned to Ava. "Didn't you say it was moved to next week?" I froze. Ava said casually, "I thought Eliana said that. Must have been a mix-up." I said nothing. I knew I never mentioned a date change. But Dad didn't question it. He just shrugged and went upstairs. That night, I lay with my back to the wall, clutching a small certificate from the organizers. I had dreamed of him seeing me up there, seeing that I'd grown, that I wasn't just some shy kid. But it had all been orchestrated. Ava had stolen the moment I had rehearsed in my head for weeks. Not long after, I received an interview invitation for a summer scholarship at an arts academy in Boston. I was so excited I literally jumped in my room. But days passed and my dad never mentioned it. When I finally asked him, he looked surprised. "What invitation?" I tore through the room looking for the letter, but it was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until the day I was cleaning the house that I discovered the envelope, torn in half, at the bottom of a drawer in Ava's room. I held the ripped paper in my hand, a cold chill running down my spine. I wanted to believe it was just a mistake. But my gut told me Ava knew exactly what she was doing. I brought the torn letter to my father, my voice trembling as I spoke. This was the scholarship I received. I could have gone, but I didn't know the letter ended up in her room. Dad frowned, eyeing the torn edge of the paper. He turned to Ava, his tone lowering. "Did you know about this?" Ava sighed, arms crossed over her chest. "I just saw it lying around in the living room and put it away. I didn't know it was that important." Dad looked at me, then back at Ava. But in the end, he just shook his head and told me, "Next time, if it's something important, make sure to keep it safe." I didn't have the strength to argue. I nodded, turned away, and in that moment I knew I had lost. Not because I was wrong, but because I didn't have the authority in his eyes to make him question Ava. After that, I started speaking less. I still did my homework, still sketched, still kept my room tidy, but I stopped hoping he would understand me. I could feel the invisible wall between us growing thicker by the day. I began to avoid sitting at the dinner table with them unless absolutely necessary. I stopped sharing my academic accomplishments too because all it did was give Ava another chance to mock or twist them. One day, my homeroom teacher called home, inviting my father to the end-of-year award ceremony because I had been named among the school's top students. I was excited all week, preparing my speech, carefully picking out an outfit. But right before the big day, Dad called the school to say he couldn't attend. The reason? Ava had a mild fever and needed to be taken to the doctor. When my name was called, I looked down at the empty seats. All around me were proud parents holding flowers and cameras. I clutched my speech with shaking hands. That night I asked Dad, "Is Ava okay?" He answered vaguely, "She's fine. Just feeling a little under the weather." I knew I had been quietly pushed aside. Ava was never sick. It was just her way of dimming my light in front of him. And the worst part was he let it happen without a flicker of doubt. I used to think that if I were better behaved, if I worked harder, if I stayed quiet at the right times, maybe Dad would see the truth. I was wrong. The truth can't reach someone who refuses to see it. And my father chose to keep his eyes shut, because it was easier than admitting he had put his faith in the wrong person. Those betrayals didn't just cost me opportunities. They took away my trust, my sense of safety in the one place I thought I belonged. And when you grow up feeling like no one's in your corner, you start building walls. Not to keep others out, but to stop yourself from getting hurt again. I left Ohio the moment I graduated high school. I had applied to colleges across several states, but I only had one goal in mind: to get as far from home as possible. I didn't say any big goodbye to Dad or Ava. We had a stiff dinner. Dad clumsily scooped a few cold slices of meat onto my plate, then told me, "Take care of yourself." Ava didn't say anything, just gave me a long sideways glance, as if I were the weak one running away from reality. But I wasn't running. I was surviving. I chose a tech university, somewhere I knew I'd feel out of place among hundreds of students sketching circuit boards and spreadsheets. I studied multimedia communications, a world that felt like mine. Color, words, emotion, and imagery. I wanted to tell stories, to build new worlds, ones where no one was forgotten. In my sophomore year, I met Daniel in a public speaking class. He was the kind of guy everyone liked. Tall, bright-eyed, with a quick, easy smile and a habit of cracking gentle jokes that made people feel at ease. I wasn't drawn to him right away. I assumed people like Daniel came from a different universe, one without silent dinners and sharp-edged glances. But one rainy afternoon, as I stayed behind to fix a presentation, Daniel sat beside me and asked, "Need a hand?" I shook my head, but he didn't leave. "Your intro, it felt really honest. It reminded me of my mom." I turned to him. Something in his voice, a quiet dip, a soft break, made me stop typing. "Your mom? She passed away 3 years ago," Daniel said gently. "Pancreatic cancer." I said nothing more. I simply moved my laptop aside so he could sit closer. We edited the presentation together, and by the end I found myself telling him about my mom, the woman who once taught me how to make almond cookies every Christmas, whose soft perfume I could still remember on winter nights. After that, we started spending more time together. First, it was just homework. Then morning coffee. Then slow walks through the campus as the trees turned golden fall. With Daniel, I didn't have to pretend I was okay. I could talk about silly things, feel my feelings, and not always be strong. Daniel introduced me to his family that Thanksgiving. I still remember the unfamiliar warmth walking into his parents' suburban home. The kitchen glowed under golden lights, the smell of roasted turkey filled the air, and laughter spilled from the living room. His mother, Helen, hugged me at the door and said, "Eliana, we're so glad you're here." At the long dining table draped in velvet red, I sat between Daniel and Uncle Victor, his father's brother who had lived alone all his life but never missed a family gathering. He had kind eyes, salt and pepper hair, and a way of understanding you before you even spoke. "What's your major?" he asked when I was still unsure how to start. "Visual communications," I replied. "I want to work in social advocacy or documentaries." He smiled, eyes lighting up. "That's wonderful. We need storytellers who see into people's hearts." I don't remember what was said after that. I only remember his hand resting gently on mine, not forced, not fake. Just enough to make me feel, if only for that moment, truly seen. From that night on, I visited Daniel's home more often. We'd study in the living room, bake with his mom, and listen to Uncle Victor's stories from his teaching days. One time he showed me a notebook full of his old lecture ideas, back when he was a literature professor. "I never had kids," he said, "but if I did, I'd want them to grow up knowing their thoughts mattered." I turned away when he said that because my eyes stung with tears. Over time, Daniel's family became a place I returned to, not just for Daniel but because I didn't have to hide there. No Ava. No suspicion. No one pointing out flaws. Just warmth. Once, while I was peeling apples in the kitchen, Daniel's mom stood beside me and quietly asked, "Mark? That's your father's name, isn't it?" I paused. "Yeah, how did you know?" "You said it in your sleep. A few days ago when you dozed off on the sofa." I smiled, but my heart felt heavy. Maybe I was dreaming of things I never really had. She said nothing more. Just reached out and smoothed my hair. It was a small gesture, but I carried it with me. Daniel's love came softly, like spring wind. Not loud or showy, but always there when I needed it. And the love from his family, from Uncle Victor, helped me see that sometimes you don't need to be born into a family to belong to one. I started believing in the idea of family again. Not the people who share your blood, but the ones who choose to stay, to listen, to love you unconditionally. I used to think I would always be the one left behind. But every time Uncle Victor knocked on my dorm room door with a box of ginger cookies his mom sent, every time Daniel held me tight after a long day arguing with Ava on the phone, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. And it was through those once strange hands that I started dreaming of a home again. A home I got to choose. No more Ava, no more whispered lies twisting reality. Just me and the people who saw me exactly as I was. I moved to New York the summer I turned 26, carrying an old suitcase, a folder full of ambition, and the silver bracelet my mother left behind. The city was massive, crowded, and had no space for the faint of heart. But maybe that's exactly why I felt like I belonged there. I started working for a mid-sized marketing firm in Midtown that specialized in social brand strategies. I was hired as a creative assistant, and thanks to the small campaigns I helped build, including a community-driven initiative to prevent teen depression, I was promoted faster than I had ever dared to dream. Within just 3 years, I became a senior project manager handling multi-million-dollar contracts with nonprofit organizations, education funds, and even leading media campaigns for a major healthcare corporation. I had my own office, a team I personally recruited, and proposal decks that were mentioned at industry conferences. But more importantly, I felt like I had a voice. After every successful press briefing, I would walk out to the sound of applause, silently thinking to myself, "I wish Mom could see this. She would have been proud," I told myself each time I looked back. The girl who once sat quietly drawing by a window in a gloomy Ohio house was now leading dozens through the moving parts of a national campaign. Daniel remained my steadfast shoulder. He landed a job with an engineering firm based in Brooklyn, and we moved in together into a small fourth-floor apartment filled with sunlight and potted plants on the balcony. In the evenings, he would read while I typed away on my laptop, a hot pot of tea between us and soft jazz humming in the background. We didn't need noise. Just presence. Everything felt nearly whole, until one autumn evening when I opened an email with a subject line from an unnamed address, "News about Ava." I clicked it open. It was a brief message from an old high school friend, someone who had once been close to Ava. She wrote that Ava had been fired from a real estate agency in Cincinnati for manipulating client data. She had left the city and was now living in a suburb near Springfield, the same area where my father still lived. I froze. It had been nearly 6 years since I last saw Ava. In the few phone calls I had with my father, I only exchanged short pleasantries before steering the conversation to work or weather. I never had the courage to ask, "How's Ava doing?" I had assumed she had moved on, maybe started a family, or at least settled into a stable life. But no. Ava hadn't changed. She was still dodging consequences by running back to the most familiar place she knew. Home. Gradually, in calls that followed, I started hearing her name again, layered gently into my father's voice. "Ava's been making dinner for me every week. She's been really thoughtful lately, keeps the yard neat." I listened with indifference. I was no longer the 16-year-old girl yearning for her father's approval. But deep down, a small part of me still ached. Ava had returned, and somehow, all her past mistakes seemed to dissolve. To my father, she was the dutiful daughter again, while I became the busy one in New York, too far, too tied up to visit. That November, Daniel proposed to me. He didn't do it in front of a crowd, no fireworks, no orchestra. Just a cold evening walk through Bryant Park, where the trees had turned golden and red, and leaves rustled beneath our feet on the stone paths. As I sat down to rest on a bench, he pulled a small ring box from his coat pocket and said, "Eliana, you've lived enough years feeling like you didn't belong. I don't want you to ever feel alone again. Let's get married, okay?" I didn't need time to think. I nodded. And so the plans began. We chose a historic hotel in Brooklyn as the venue. The rooftop garden was lined with greenery, glowing warmly under string lights, turning every afternoon into something almost magical. Daniel said he wanted a wedding that wasn't too big, not flashy. Just close friends, both families, and lots of white flowers. I held the phone in my hand for a long time before finally calling my father. He picked up on the third ring. His voice sounded the same, but there was a slight hesitation to it. "How are you, Dad?" "Good. Still hanging in there. Ava made potato soup last night." I bit my lip gently. "Good. I'm calling with some news. Daniel and I are engaged." Silence for a beat. "Really? Oh, congratulations. Daniel's a good man." I exhaled softly. "We're planning the wedding for next summer. And I'd really love for you to walk me down the aisle." A pause long enough to make my chest tighten. Then he said, "You really want that?" "I do." I heard emotion swell in his voice. "I'd be honored. If that's what you want, then I'll be there." I smiled through quiet tears. In that moment, it felt like I had mended a thread long broken. I didn't tell him how many times Ava made me cry. I didn't mention how he had felt like a stranger to me for so long. I simply clung to a small hope that on the most important day of my life, he would show up, not as a distant shadow but as a true father. And I thought maybe that would be enough. Maybe things could start to heal from there. But that was before Ava's real intentions began to surface. Intentions I could never have imagined. And before I learned that sometimes the past doesn't stay behind you. Sometimes, it circles back, bigger, sharper, and capable of cutting deeper than before. 2 months before the wedding, with everything nearly finalized, from flowers and dress to guest list, I received a call from my father around 9 in the evening. I was at Daniel's place, reviewing the reception menu with him and his mom, Helen. "Just got off the phone with Ava," my father said, his voice low, carefully chosen. "She's got some good news. Her company just promoted her to regional lead broker." I stayed quiet. "Good news?" I used to work in real estate. I knew full well that title wasn't some huge career milestone, and it definitely didn't require a celebration the way he said it. But I kept my voice steady. "That's so. Congrats to her." "Yeah. Ava says she's throwing a cocktail party to mark the occasion. It's on your wedding day." I sat upright. "What did you say?" "June 15th. At the country club near our house. She says she already put down a deposit, already sent invites. She figures if she holds hers in the morning and yours is in the afternoon, it should all work out." I clenched the phone tighter. That country club was at least a 2.5-hour drive from my wedding venue. "What do you think?" I asked slowly. My father sighed. "Ava says this is a chance to rebuild her image with clients, to re-establish credibility. She said if I'm not there, it'll look really bad." "And what about me?" Silence. I could hear him swallow hard through the line. "I'm not saying I won't be at your wedding. Are you still planning to walk me down the aisle?" More silence. I stood and stepped out onto the balcony, night wind brushing my face. Behind me in the living room, I could still hear Helen and Daniel chatting and laughing softly. A different world. One that felt far from the reality collapsing beneath me. "Dad," I kept my voice steady. "I picked that date 8 months ago. Sent invitations at the beginning of the year. You agreed to walk with me. And now, I don't want to hurt you. But you are." He lowered his voice. "You don't understand. Ava needs me right now." I closed my eyes. Memories rose like a tide, piano echoing in an empty auditorium, the speech I gave alone, the scholarship letters he never saw. Ava, always the one who needed him. "So I don't." "Don't say that." "Then what?" His voice turned brittle. "I think, maybe you should ask someone else to walk you. A friend. Or Daniel's father." I let go of the railing. My hands were ice cold. "Okay. Eliana, don't be upset. I'll still come. I'll try to make it in time for the reception, maybe even the ceremony if I can swing it. No need to try, I said softly. You don't need to choose. You already have. I hung up before he could say anything else. Daniel came out onto the balcony. Seeing me standing there, silent with my back turned, he gently placed a hand on my shoulder. How's your dad? I didn't turn around. Just shook my head. He said, he's not going to walk me down the aisle. Daniel gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. We stood like that for a long time, neither of us speaking. The wind carried the scent of lavender from the neighbor's balcony, faintly reminding me of summers long gone, when I used to dream of holding my dad's hand through a crowd. Now there was only emptiness. The next morning I got a message from Ava. No greeting, no explanation. Just one line. Hope you understand. Wishing you a beautiful wedding. I scoffed. Not a single sorry. No acknowledgement. And definitely not an ounce of remorse. I didn't reply. I didn't need to anymore. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the wedding planning. The closer the big day came, the busier I got. Finalizing flowers, altering my dress, sending reminders to guests. Daniel was always right there beside me, quietly making everything feel lighter. But every night I woke up in the dark. Not from stress, just an ache that sat heavy in my chest. I used to dream about walking arm in arm with my father through those doors, sunlight catching on the folds of my white dress, and him smiling at me. That dream was gone now. I never told Helen, but one evening while we were picking table flowers together, she gently placed her hand on mine. Your dad's not coming, is he? I froze, then gave a slight nod. You don't have to say anything, Helen said. Some people come into our lives like morning sunlight, gentle, warm. Others come and go like passing storms, leaving behind the cold. What matters is who stays with you in the moments that truly count. I looked at her. Her eyes held no pity, just the quiet understanding of a woman who'd once been hurt by someone who should have protected her. Will you be okay? I nodded slowly. I don't need him anymore to know I matter. I said it out loud. And I actually believed it. But deep down I still didn't know who would walk me down the aisle. And that was when someone completely unexpected stepped into the light. Someone who wasn't my father, wasn't blood, but had always been there, quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment I'd need them most. I thought I was used to rejection, to the carefully packaged excuses wrapped in silence or a shaking head. But I wasn't. When my dad called and told me to find someone else to walk you, I broke, just like the 13-year-old girl I once was, holding her speech alone at the award ceremony, pretending to be fine but unable to stop the tears. I carried that weight quietly for a week. Went to work each morning. Reviewed table layouts with Daniel each night. Smiled at his mother whenever she asked, "Is everything going okay?" I said yes. I always said yes. But one Saturday night while we were having dinner at Helen and Victor's, I couldn't hold it in anymore. It happened when I saw the lace handkerchief Helen had prepared for me to carry down the aisle. She handed it to me with a soft smile, saying that she and her former mother-in-law had kept it for 3 generations. This was once in my mother's hands when she got married, Helen said. Now it's your turn. I held it with both hands. The delicate lace edges trembled slightly beneath my fingers. And I started to cry. Daniel rested his hand on my back, light as air. I collapsed onto his shoulder with a sigh that carried years of exhaustion. I couldn't hide it anymore. Helen quietly cleared the main dishes and took them to the kitchen, leaving me sitting with Victor beside me. Daniel gently squeezed my hand and Victor poured more tea. Your father, he's not walking you down the aisle? He asked, voice calm like he didn't want to make the pain worse. I nodded without looking up. He chose to be with Ava. She's hosting a party on my wedding day. Victor stayed silent for a moment, then said, sometimes the people who are supposed to be there choose to leave. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve someone to walk beside you. I looked at him. Victor's eyes were deep and clear, like a quiet lake reflecting wounds too old to name. I once walked another young woman down the aisle, he continued, his voice even and soft. She was my goddaughter. Her father passed away unexpectedly a month before the wedding. Her mother was a close friend of mine from college. When she called and said, Uncle Victor, I don't know what to do, I didn't hesitate. I walked with her, not because I was her father, but because I loved her and had always been there when she needed someone. I didn't say anything. In that moment, it felt like someone had touched the deepest part of my pain without making it worse. Family isn't always blood, he said, placing his hand gently over mine. Family is who chooses to stay, who chooses to listen, who chooses to show up. I gripped the lace handkerchief tightly. I don't want to walk alone, I whispered, almost a confession. But I don't want to be hurt again either. I'm scared that if I open my heart, I'll be rejected again. Victor slowly shook his head. You're not that little girl waiting in the audience for her father anymore, Eliana. You have the right now to choose who stands beside you in the most important moments. Someone who deserves it. I was still. The air in that small kitchen felt softer somehow, as if his words had loosened something long buried inside me. That night when we got home, I sat in the bedroom for hours, my hands tracing the surface of the lace handkerchief. Daniel stepped in from the living room and sat beside me quietly. What are you thinking? He asked softly. I didn't answer right away. Then after a long while I turned to him. If I asked Victor, would you think that's strange? Daniel smiled, warm and gentle. I think it would be the right thing. And I know how honored he would feel to be chosen by the daughter of an old friend. I nodded. The next morning I pulled out my phone, found Victor's number, and asked to meet him at a small coffee shop near my house. He arrived earlier than I did, already seated with a cup of tea and a book in hand. When I walked in, he smiled, like he already knew why I had come. Have you thought it through? He asked, no small talk. I sat down, wrapping my hands around the hot tea the server had just brought over. Victor, I looked at him for a long time, then said slowly, I know you're not my father, but I grew up without a hand like yours. I missed having someone I could trust, someone who was there, someone who gave love without conditions. I think, if I get to choose who walks with me down the aisle, it should be someone who chose to be there, not out of duty but out of love. Victor said nothing for a few seconds. Then he gently set down his book, reached across the table and took my hand in his. You know, I had the honor once before. But if you give me a second chance, that would be the greatest gift I've ever received. I laughed through my tears. So, you'll say yes? Not just yes, he said. I'll be proud. And I'll be the first one at the wedding, ready before the doors even open. Inside my heart, something long broken felt whole again. Not because my father returned, but because someone else had stayed. As I stepped outside the cafe, light rain had started to fall. I stood beneath the awning, watching people walk by, my hands still warm from Victor's grip. Not every wound can be healed. But some moments, gentle, genuine, give us just enough courage to move forward. And I knew that when the ceremony doors opened, I wouldn't be walking with emptiness. I would walk with a hand that held mine by choice, by quiet love, not promises, but presence. My wedding took place on a soft summer afternoon, the sun gentle behind a thin veil of clouds. The rooftop of the historic hotel where Daniel and I chose to marry was draped in white hydrangeas, pale pink peonies, and hundreds of tiny lights swaying in the breeze. I remember standing behind the glass doors, clutching my bouquet, my heart pounding in my chest as I looked down the aisle and saw Daniel waiting. And next to me stood Victor, handsome in a dark gray tuxedo, his silver hair combed neatly, eyes filled with pride. Are you ready? He asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. Then, let the world see who you are. The doors opened to the sound of gentle piano music. I walked with Victor down the aisle, passing rows of friends, family, and familiar faces turned toward me with warmth in their eyes. Some smiled, some wiped away tears. I saw Helen standing with Henry, Daniel's mother, gripping her husband's arm, overcome with emotion. Daniel looked at me, and that look made every pain, every doubt vanish. Victor handed me to Daniel with a soft smile. You are worthy of love and of being cherished. Walk this life together because not everyone finds something this rare. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because in that moment I felt whole. Even without my biological father by my side, I felt no emptiness. Because the person beside me had chosen to be there, with his whole heart. The ceremony was warm and sincere. Daniel and I read vows we had written ourselves. Simple but deep promises. We vowed never to turn our backs on each other no matter what. To listen, to hold each other in silence, and to remember why we fell in love. Every day. When the pastor declared us husband and wife, the applause erupted like one giant embrace. The reception began in joyful celebration. White linens on every table, flickering candlelight, glasses of wine filled to the brim, and laughter echoing from every corner. I was taking photos with my college friends when I saw Helen wave from the far end of the terrace. "Someone arrived late," she whispered as I walked over. I turned my head. My heart sank. My father, Mark, was entering the reception area with Ava following close behind in a deep red dress, so striking it was impossible not to notice. Every pair of eyes at the garden party turned toward them. No one spoke. Only the sound of their heavy footsteps echoed on the stone floor, pounding like a drum in my chest. I froze for a few seconds. Daniel immediately stepped beside me, his hand gently resting on my back. I took a deep breath, gripping his hand as if to steady myself. My father stopped near the dessert table. He looked around, his eyes briefly passing over me, then shifting to Victor, who was standing across the space, still in his gray suit, meeting his gaze without flinching. Ava smiled. It was a smile I knew all too well, not out of joy but satisfaction. "Good evening, everyone," she began, uninvited, speaking as if she were giving a speech at her own event. "Apologies for being late. But I think, for a special occasion, it's never too late to make an entrance, right?" No one answered. Ava took a few more steps, the click of her heels sharp against the stone floor. "I just wanted to mention, while everyone is celebrating here, not many may know that earlier this morning, I also hosted a recognition event at the country club." I stood still. "A real event," Ava continued. "Not just a dress and flowers. A ceremony acknowledging actual accomplishments, ones I achieved through my own merit. Not by copying others." That last sentence cut like a cold blade. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Some guests glanced at me. Others whispered among themselves. I looked at Ava without anger, without fear. Only an old, familiar feeling stirred inside me: disappointment. Helen stepped forward, her hand resting on my shoulder, about to say something, when Uncle Victor stepped away from his table and walked straight toward my father and Ava. "That's enough," he said. His voice wasn't loud but firm enough that no one could ignore it. "Today is Eliana and Daniel's day. If you're here to hurt her one more time, then I suggest you turn around and leave." Ava scoffed. "I don't recall anyone asking you to speak on our behalf." "No one asked me," Uncle Victor replied, calm but unwavering. "Just like no one asked you to walk in here and insult others." My father turned toward him. His eyes didn't hold the fury I remembered from my younger years. Instead, there was a flicker of confusion. Then he looked at me. "Eliana." I stepped forward, standing in front of him. "You arrived late," I said. "And you brought the person who took away countless important moments from me." "I didn't know Ava was going to." "You never know," I cut him off. "And I'm always the one left to deal with it." Ava opened her mouth to speak, but Daniel stepped in. "That's enough," he said, calm but firm. "Eliana doesn't need anyone to speak for her. Not today. Not here." The crowd remained silent. I looked at my father one last time. "If you came here to make me feel guilty for not being like Ava, you came to the wrong place. Today isn't about your choice. Today is about mine, choosing the person who walks beside me." Then I turned away, taking Daniel's hand. Soft music began to play again from the band. But I knew from that very moment, this space no longer belonged to disruption. It belonged to me, to those who chose to stay, and to the words I had never dared to speak, now spoken under the lights with the truth. And in front of people who finally saw clearly who walked into the ceremony, and who would always remain on the outside. The wedding continued after that tense moment, but the atmosphere on the rooftop had clearly shifted. Something quiet moved between glances and whispers. I stood still, clutching Daniel's hand tightly, my chin lifted high, though inside, my heart was pounding like a war drum. I hadn't expected my father to show up, much less Ava orchestrating such a shameless performance to humiliate me on my special day. I thought that was the climax. But then the sound of a chair scraping against the floor pierced the silence of the gathering. A man stood up from a corner table, tall, slender, with a familiar face that took me a few seconds to recognize. "Excuse me," he said, his voice composed but clear. "My name is Thomas. I used to work with Ava Monroe at Glassridge Realty for 3 years." The air froze. Ava snapped her head around, her face draining of color. "I hadn't planned to speak today," I came because of an invitation from Daniel, an old classmate, Thomas continued, glancing briefly at me before addressing the guests again. But after what I've just heard, I don't think I can remain silent. Ava stepped forward, her voice shaky but trying to sound steady. Thomas, I don't know what you're talking about. Today is Eliana's wedding, not. Exactly because it's Eliana's wedding, he interrupted, that I can't let her be slandered by a blatant fabrication. Some guests began whispering. Daniel gave my hand a gentle squeeze as if to reassure me. Thomas pulled his phone from his suit pocket and tapped on a file. This is a photo of the event Ava referred to as her career recognition gala. The screen displayed a small, plainly decorated room with only 8 attendees, mostly old acquaintances of Ava with no representatives from any company or industry. There were no contracts signed, no awards given, no media coverage. She hasn't worked in real estate for the past 6 months, after being let go for multiple administrative violations. Ava cut in, trying to take control. I was set up. Thomas, you missed 3 days without explanation and forged a client's signature. Do you want me to show everyone the internal disciplinary report too? The entire rooftop seemed to hold its breath. I didn't say a word. I just looked Ava in the eye. No hatred, no pain. Only a plain truth standing stark beneath the soft golden lights and dozens of skeptical stares now turned toward her. But it wasn't over yet. Another voice rose, lower, steadier. If I may add something. Everyone turned left. A petite woman stood, her light brown hair tousled gently by the wind, but her eyes were resolute. It took me a second and then I whispered to myself, Grace? Grace. My best friend from middle school, once like a sister to me, but we lost touch when she moved out of state. I never imagined seeing her again, here. Hello, everyone. I'm Grace, a former classmate of Eliana's and once a neighbor of her family for many years. Ava whispered something to my father, but he remained frozen, his body stiff like stone. I don't know if everyone will believe this, but I still have a copy of an email, specifically, an email Ava sent to Eliana's father nearly 12 years ago. She pulled a folder from her purse and held it up for everyone to see. In the letter, Ava made up a story saying Eliana had dropped out of school to follow an older man, that she did something shameful and was expelled. Ava sent that letter from her own computer at home. I happened to come across it when I was asked to catsit while they were away. I downloaded and kept it, because I just had a feeling something was very wrong. Grace opened a small laptop and quickly connected it to the projector near the stage. Within seconds, the email appeared before the entire crowd. Subject line: I think you should know what Eliana's been up to. She'll destroy this family if you keep siding with her. The body of the email went on, filled with blatant lies. Eliana dropped out. Eliana lied. Eliana was out of control. And at the end, I think it's time you see who truly deserves your love. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Ava turned pale, her lips unable to form a single word. My father, Mark, still hadn't moved. Grace looked toward me, her gaze softening. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. But today, when I saw you walk down the aisle alone, I knew it was time someone stood up for you. I looked at my father. His face twitched slightly, then his head lowered, like something heavy had just dropped on his shoulders after years of pretending it didn't exist. He stepped back. Oh God. I saw tears fall from my father's eyes. Not from pride. Not from anger. But from regret. He turned toward Ava, who was clutching his hand, trembling. But this time he let go. He didn't look at her again. He turned to me. His hand lifted, trembling as if he wanted to say something. But I simply shook my head. Not out of resentment. But because I knew, today I didn't need him to say anything more. The truth had spoken for me. After all these years, I stood there on the rooftop bathed in sunlight and soft wind, as the shards of truth shattered like glass hitting cold stone. No one spoke. The vast space was swallowed in a silence that had no name, a mix of shock and sorrow spreading through the crowd. I looked at my father again, seeing the chaos in his eyes. A man who had once been my rock, now looking like a stranger on the street. He walked toward me, no longer carrying that commanding presence. His shoulders sagged, his eyes bloodshot, each step shaky with emotion. He softly called my name, voice barely above a whisper. Eliana. I didn't step back. But I didn't move forward either. I met his eyes, steady and calm. There was no more anger. No more hoping. Just a quiet stillness. The kind that comes when a heart has torn so many times it can't tear anymore. I always wanted you by my side, I said, my voice even and soft, but every word pressed down like a weight on the chest. Since Mom passed, I had only one wish, that you'd choose me, believe in me, stand with me. I saw his hand trembling. But you gave your love to lies. You didn't just turn your back. You believed the worst about me without asking a single question. You stayed silent when I needed you most and spoke up only when I no longer wanted to hear it. He looked like he wanted to say something, but his throat tightened. His lips moved slightly, then gave up, his eyes blurring with tears. You let Ava lead you with made-up stories year after year. Who did you think I was? The kind of daughter who'd drop out to chase after an older man? Someone who would lie to her own father just to feel loved more than someone else. He raised a shaking hand to cover his face. I took a small step closer. I don't need your apology. I don't need your explanations. I just want you to remember, real love doesn't come from blood. It comes from choice. And you didn't choose me. A few guests began wiping away tears. Some turned away, unable to watch such a painful scene unfold. I turned to Ava. She stood alone at the edge of the rooftop, pale, jaw clenched, eyes still burning with fury. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She didn't deny. She just stared at me with a deep, bitter hatred, like my mere survival was something she couldn't forgive. Ava, I said, my voice strangely calm, I used to think you were just jealous. But today I realize, it wasn't just about wanting me to fail. You wanted me erased. Ava narrowed her eyes. Are you done? You want people to feel sorry for you now? I don't need pity. I just want to say, you've already lost, I replied steadily. Not because you were exposed, but because you've never known what it's like to have a heart unruled by fear. Ava tossed her hair and scoffed. You think you're so noble? Standing there in your fancy wedding dress, your movie-worthy ceremony? You're no different from me. You want love, praise, to be chosen. The only difference is I'm not afraid to do what it takes to get it, and all you do is whine. I said nothing. Ava looked around once more, then abruptly turned and walked toward the door. My father called out, Ava, wait. But she didn't look back. Didn't say a word. The glass door closed behind her, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victorious. I only felt a hollow space carved out by years of silence no one ever dared to fill. I turned, and at that moment Uncle Victor stepped forward. He gently placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice rang out, not loud, not dramatic, but with the quiet weight of someone who's lived through storms. I'm not Eliana's biological father, he said, turning to the guests. We don't share blood. But today I walked her down the aisle. Not because I was trying to replace anyone, but because I believe fathers, uncles, anyone, only deserve to be called family when they choose love over lies. A few guests nodded. Victor turned to me, his eyes warm. Family is the person who doesn't walk away when you're at your weakest. Who doesn't need blood to know right from wrong. I held his hand tightly. My eyes stung. Daniel came forward and gently wrapped his arms around me from behind. I'm proud of you, he whispered into my ear. I nodded. I didn't need thanks. I didn't need explanations. Just someone beside me who understood and chose to stay. I walked back toward the stage where the microphone still stood. I looked around. Everyone was watching. I spoke, not to justify, not to demand justice, but simply to free myself. Thank you for witnessing a part of the truth today. Not because I wanted someone to feel humiliated, but because I believe some things can only end when they are brought to light. Thank you to those who stood here, for me, for Daniel, and for believing in what real family means. I looked down at the front table, where my closest friends were nodding gently, where Daniel's mother was holding my hand with such tenderness. And I smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had made it through. A week after the wedding, I received a handwritten letter. The handwriting was familiar, slightly slanted like the lines from the journal I used to sneak peeks at when I was little. My father's diary. But it wasn't secret musings. It was a direct, almost unbelievable apology. My dearest Eliana, I know I was wrong. Not just on the day of your wedding, but for many years. I believed the wrong people, listened to what I should have ignored, and turned my back when you needed me most. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I ask you to open your heart again. But I ask at the very least for a chance. A chance to make things right, even if that just means listening to you talk about your new life. Mark. I sat quietly by the window, the afternoon light bathing the card resting on my lap in golden warmth. Part of me wanted to tear it apart, but another part wanted to hold it tight, as if it were a fragile sign that he was still my father despite the years apart, despite the nights I cried alone without him. After a few days of thinking, I decided to meet him. But this time I wouldn't go alone. I brought Daniel with me. We chose a small, quiet cafe by the lake, where I used to study during high school. As I stepped in, I saw my father already seated. He looked older than he did at the wedding, but his eyes had lost that familiar pride and defensiveness. They had softened, like the eyes of someone who had finally realized the value of something he'd lost for far too long. "Hi, sweetheart." He stood up, hesitant, then turned to Daniel. "And you are?" "My husband," I replied before Daniel could answer. "The one who stood by me when you didn't." Dad nodded slightly, then looked down at his coffee. We sat down, quiet for a few minutes. A breeze drifted across the lake, rustling the willow branches on the other side. "I don't know where to start," he said. "But I know if you're sitting here today, then I still have a chance." I looked him straight in the eyes. "I don't need a perfect father. But I do need someone who takes responsibility. Not just for his own mistakes, but also for what he allowed Ava to do." He sighed. "I didn't see it. Ava always had a way of making me feel guilty for not being around when she was young. I thought if I didn't defend her, she'd disappear again, accuse me of being a bad father. I didn't realize I was hurting you." I nodded gently. "And I can't keep being the one who gets hurt. So, can you give me a chance?" he asked, his eyes searching mine like a man waiting on judgment. "Not to be the good dad, but to learn how to listen. To change." I looked at Daniel. He gently squeezed my hand beneath the table, said nothing, just nodded. I turned back to my father. "I'll give you a chance," I said slowly. "But not without conditions. You have to truly want to change. You have to learn how to set boundaries. And the first step, Ava doesn't get to lead you anymore." He nodded. "Ava's left town. No one knows where she is. She's not in touch with me anymore." I wasn't surprised. Ava always lived in roles. When the lights went off, she left to find another stage. But I was no longer the one standing behind the curtain, waiting for my supporting part. "You can start," I said, "by listening. Not as a father, but as someone who wants to begin again." From that meeting, Dad started to change. He would text me but never demand. Sometimes he sent old books he used to read when I was little with notes scribbled inside. "Page 42, remember you once asked about this line?" I never got to answer. We didn't go back to how things were. But we started anew, slowly, like tiny bricks laid to build a bridge not made of blood but of effort. I spent the months after the wedding with a peace I had never known before. The new home Daniel and I shared sat in a quiet suburb, where the backyard garden flourished and where Victor often visited on Saturday afternoons to help Daniel fix old things. Victor became my true anchor, the kind of family you don't inherit by blood but choose through love. Someone who always showed up, not with words but with presence. I still remember the first time Victor hugged me after the wedding. He whispered in my ear, "From now on, whenever you need someone to walk you through a hard path, just call me. I won't promise to be the first one there, but I promise I'll never be late." And he kept his promise. 1 year later, during our first anniversary party, I stood in a sunlit garden, holding Daniel's hand, surrounded by rows of wooden chairs filled with loved ones. Victor raised his glass and everyone clapped as Daniel turned to me, gently smiling. "Would you like to say something?" I nodded. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from knowing that what I was about to say would touch the hearts of those listening. I stepped forward and faced them. My voice was soft but certain. "Maybe what people remember most from last year's wedding isn't the flowers or the dress, or even the vows, but the moment when a man who isn't my biological father, who shares no bloodline with me, took my arm and walked me down the aisle." I paused. Victor looked at me, his eyes glistening. Because the man who walked beside me that day wasn't just my uncle. He was someone who chose to stand beside me. Not out of obligation, not because of a role, but because of love. And I realized, family isn't just where you're born. It's made of those who choose to love you, who show up every single day. No matter how the world changes, no matter which names fade, that love remains. The applause that followed sounded like the heartbeat of many mended hearts. I smiled, bowed slightly, and returned to Daniel, the man who had held my hand through the darkest chapters of my life. And in that moment, I knew I had truly found my family. Not through lineage, but through choice. Through love. Through time. And through a peace that needed no proof anymore. My story might resemble someone out there. Someone who once waited for approval from a parent, who poured their heart into a relationship that felt impossible to change. But in the end, I learned this. Blood doesn't define family. Actions do. Presence does. Real enduring love does. I'm not telling this story to reopen old wounds. I'm sharing it because it took me years to understand something simple. You don't have to hold on to those who hurt you just because they carry the title family. You have the right to build your own circle of family, from the ones who choose to stand with you, love you, and believe in you every day. And what about you? Has anyone in your life ever made you realize who your true family really is? Have you ever had to reset a boundary to protect your heart? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your story because maybe your voice will help someone else find the answer they've been looking for. And if you'd like to keep walking with me through stories of family, forgiveness, and the small life-changing moments that touch the soul, hit that follow button. There are still so many honest, meaningful stories waiting for us ahead. Thank you for listening.